Sherlock Holmes. The very name instills an image of a lanky, aristocratic detective, complete with a smoking pipe, magnifying glass, overcoat, and deerstalker. So believable and well ingrained in culture is this man, that many people often mistakenly believe that Sherlock Holmes was a real person living in 17th century London, solving crimes. Sadly, these people would be very mistaken. Sherlock Holmes was no real man. However, he is far more than a mere figment of Arthur Conan Doyle's imagination. In fact, he is so influential that the way we solve crime today is dependent on the methods his character once used. More aptly, the methods that his inspiration once used. So who do we have to thank for the creation of Sherlock Holmes? True, Arthur Conan Doyle imagined the character, but not without help of his inspiration for the character, his former medical professor from Edinburgh, Dr. Joseph Bell. Haven't heard of him before? Don't know very much about him? That's okay. You're about to get to know him in today's episode of Facts and Frauds. So what do we know about Dr. Joseph Bell? Let's stick to the facts. We know that he was the great-grandson of Benjamin Bell, who was considered to be the first scientific surgeon. In fact, it was Benjamin Bell's textbook, A System of Surgery, that set the standard for modern surgery today. It seems like this family is prone to setting standards, whether it be medicine or detective work. Benjamin Bell also held the title of President of the Royal College of Surgeons, a title that was passed down all the way to Joseph Bell himself through the generations. It's not hard to understand why people often say that Joseph Bell was predestined to become a great surgeon. His education wasn't just academic, though, as his father was connected with the Free Church, a Christian domination with no government ties or state ties, and was, with his two younger siblings, instructed on all things biblical. This religious background played a role in much of his life, as he found himself quoting scripture, referring to the Bible as he made donations to various foundations, and let it govern his own giving and generous nature to help others. He also had something of a green thumb, being interested in plants and animals, along with keeping his own garden. In an age where school beatings were relatively commonplace, Bell escaped unscathed thanks to his studious behavior. Also, in school, he was a bit of a sportsman, participating in Haleys and being a fine tennis player. This penchant for sport would turn him to game hunting and boxing as he grew older. After graduating, Bell would leave Edinburgh briefly to study at the University of Leiden in Holland for his medical career, which he had decided on. He didn't stay away for long, though, and soon transferred back to Edinburgh. He would also eventually marry one Edith Erskine Murray in April 17th of the year 1865. And all of this was before he met Arthur Conan Doyle some 7 years later in 1877. These are the facts as we know them, and there is little else we know completely for certain about the man, other than what Arthur Conan Doyle told us about him himself. However, using the facts we have about him and some surmise, we might be able to learn a little more about the man. For example, knowing that Bell was the inspiration for Holmes, we might assume that some of Holmes' statements in Doyle's works would be similar to those of Dr. Bell himself. Consider the sentiments of Sherlock Holmes, who often chastised Watson for writing stories in such a way as to dramatize or romanticize Holmes and his methods. It isn't that much of a stretch of the imagination to believe that Bell and Doyle had a very similar conversation, especially considering that Bell somewhat resented being famous for his connection to Holmes. This wasn't because he hated the character, but rather because he felt that people cared more for the flashiness of the deductions and wild stories over the science behind it. Sound familiar? These sentiments make me believe that many of the instances where Holmes and Watson are just conversing in the books are really glimpses into the way Joseph Bell thought and felt on matters that Doyle wrote. Holmes and Bell both resented the stories Watson or Doyle wrote, because they were not as true to life as they could have been. It makes you wonder just how much of Holmes' statements and sentiments are actually the same as Bell's. And now the question I always ask. What can we learn from the person in question? In this case, what can we take away from Joseph Bell? What do we learn from him about deduction? Well, the common sentiment between Joseph Bell and Sherlock Holmes was this: do not let the fiction become more important than the facts. Don't allow yourself to romanticize your powers of deduction, and don't prioritize flair more than the science behind it.